Also, thank you for the organization of this video opportunity to do this lecture. This lecture is actually part of my new PhD program. I'm busy doing research into using traditional Daoist medicine for healthcare purposes. And this is a multi-year program. And this is one of the sources that I used. And I will explain to you later why. I have some notes here that I think that are very important. When I signed up for the lecture, I thought about doing it only about something. But in the whole body of literature that something produced, whether he is a real person, not a real person, doesn't really matter. The Sandongjing plays a large role. I was busy with translation project at the same time from a textbook where this was in. I will tell you about it also. And since this is also one of the topics that Brazov uses for his own material and to use as a reference all the time, and his learning program is based on the development of healthcare for all the people, the common people, not for the rich necessarily. I thought like this would be a great opportunity to actually also use that text. Let me see, how do I move the... I've got to take my mouse out of there. Right. So, the Sandongjing is the model for the Dao Tang. So, it is not the Dao Tang itself, but it is a compilation that is emphasizing the main subjects in the Dao Tang. So, because the Dao Tang is huge, I don't know, I once taught in Xinjiang Talmud Vault, in Xinjiang, the Dao Tang in original handprint, it was like a cubic meter or a bit more in small booklets, and the one that I have now is a print out from the Ming Dynasty version of the Dao Tang, and it is 36 parts. And every part is about 1100 pages, and every page has 2 pages from the Dao Tang. So it is almost impossible, especially when you're not brilliant in Chinese, to read all these kind of things. So when I found this book, I was like, okay, this is an interesting middle way, because it's also for most people not possible to learn enough about Taoism to actually really realize what is important. I take here a reference to a lecture that I gave at the University of Amsterdam one time. There was a Dutch professor of Sandongjing there, not as well known as Christopher Schipper, but he never heard of religious Taoism, and he only saw Taoism as a philosophical thing. And as a result of this philosophical thing, he never really reinvested in his studies, and as a result of that, things got a little bit outdated, so to say. In the Dao Tang, or the treatise, as a book, as a text, is basically the introduction how to become an immortal. It describes it as a whole book. It describes the root practices that you need to go through to become an immortal eventually. The material Livia talked about yesterday, that is then the introduction, right? So in general it's being said that if you can do that part, you're already halfway to become immortal, but then you have to go into what we call the psychedelic universe of Taoism. The treatise, this Sandongjing, is in essence divided into 3 parts, and every part is divided into a level of introduction, a level of learning, and only the highest level is for the best students. And that references also to the Qigona. I don't know if you know about that, it's Chinese medicine. The first chapter basically says, if you teach Chinese medicine to a person who is morally not responsible, you will be a criminal. You will go to hell yourself also, right? And also, in answer to another lecture that I heard today, at the moment when you don't take good care of your health, and at that moment automatically you will become sick, you age and you die. So as we sit here, we all age and die, but we don't take good care of our health, right? So that's how it is. For me, I realized over time that this study is basically the agenda of every Taoist. right? Not just from Wudangshan, where I was living for a long time, but it was actually the hierarchy of general learning. And you can see this exemplified in the life of Li Guangfu. He is currently the Daoist chairman of all of China. He is sitting in the name of all the Daoists in the Chinese government, since it's what they call a multi-party government. And when he was introduced to me, when I had my talks with him in the past, he said, my aim is to become a god, right? So as a Daoist, I want to become a god. If I don't want to become a god, I'm not a Daoist, right? So this is basically how he stated it. So his practice, his lifestyle, and so on and so forth, everything was based on that. So pretty radical in that perspective. And in the Chinese medicine classics, like the Sandongjing, we see also basically the reference from the first 2 chapters that it's your birthright to become immortal, and if you don't take good care of yourself, you die, right? So normally all of us should become immortals. That's basically the agenda of the Chinese medicine, as it is described in the Sandongjing. In the Wudang Mountains itself, this text is still very relevant, and the Wudang Mountains itself, they take Zheng Emperor as focus of their faith, but it emphasizes inner cultivation. Many people go there to learn taijiquan or to learn other styles of martial arts. I've seen Papa and so on, which is prescribed by the Chinese government. But in effect, at the moment you get past that first part, you start getting slowly trained into the actual part of Daoism. And then the realization of any form of immortality, starting with enlightenment, is then the reward for practicing all those different kinds of Daoist arts. And the aim is also to introduce forms of recitation and Dao Tang in the sense of the 3 Ks, to actually come to understand what your meditation should have as a result and what it should contain. Like I already said, Zhang actually was very much bound by the Sandongjing, and I've already referred also that many people still do not believe he actually really existed. But for Daoists, it is like we practice it, so he existed, right? So this is, I'll say this with the Daoistjing. Historically, we know the Daoistjing is gradually compiled from all kinds of citations. At least that's what seems to come out of graves. But for Daoist, Lao Tzu was a real person, and he eventually became Daoified, and that's the reality. So this is something that also is at the heart of the Sandongjing, and we will talk about it later. This is the textbook. I have to tell you a little bit about how I got the book. I think it's an interesting, funny story. Because I was in Beijing, in Sandongjing bookstore, and I found this on a shelf. And I was like, oh, that's cool. So I could take it to the counter, and I wanted to pay for it. It was not very expensive. It was something like 10 euros or so. And they said, like, sorry, this book is not registered in our library. So it is not sold to us. So they made up a price. The 10 euros actually made up a price because they didn't sell it. They didn't have it in their supply. They didn't even know where it came from. If you want, I can send you later on a picture if you want to read it for yourself. So the version that I use is actually based on a printout on a version from the Ming Dynasty. And as such, the transmission of the Sandongjing is older, but I will not focus on the history of that part. But one of the first chapters talks about the transmission of the Sandongjing as it being transmitted from teacher to student, teacher to student, teacher to student. And one of the things that I read in there is that over time they saw this gradual degradation of the quality of students. So that at the beginning there were good students who were graduating in this method and they were able to carry the transmission forward, and there were people who have studied it. So they made this discernment between people who studied it and people who were allowed to do the transmission. Then at a certain point you start noticing that there's a sort of a gap in the transmission. That means there was people studying it but there was no transmission. And then gradually you see that women take over the transmission, and then it's alternating between women and men. One other importance is that the role of Xiongnu is very important within the Sandongjing because that is basically one of the core deities within this text. So it means that Xiongnu, grandmother West, I should then translate this, originally a snake god who gradually became the protector of the mortals. Right? So there was a lot of roles in there, and she was graduating you at some point as a mortal by giving you a bite of her peach on the tree, of course. On the book is already told. Yeah, maybe a little bit about translation, because translating from Chinese is very difficult. You also know how complicated the translation can be. Are you going to be doing a word-by-word translation? Are you trying to translate the meaning of the word? Are you trying to please the reader? Or are you trying to convey the thought of the original text? Especially when you talk about poetry, like for instance prayers. It's easy to keep things in Chinese and do the praise in Chinese, but then read into the text. So you have to meaning. But the idea is, of course, that every prayer, every text has different kind of meaning, so you have to be able to read it in a text that you understand, right? So a prayer has to be done in the rhyme and the rhythm in your own language, not in another language. Nice example is Brazov. Brazov is talking about, not everybody's doing the prayers in Cantonese, they don't do it in Mandarin. But both the Cantonese and the Mandarin people, they say it should be done in Mandarin, it should be done in Cantonese. Because this is our holy language, this is our holy language. So as soon as you do something in your own language, it becomes your holy language. That's basically the meaning of how it is being done in China. And for us, that means that staying close to the spirit of the text is more important than the actual understandability in the West. Because the idea is that you read it on a frequent basis and gradually grasp the meaning of these things, like the Daoist. The Daoist you can't understand from one kind of reading. You have to do it on a very frequent basis to get somewhere. I started this as a 10-year project, and I called it Project the Shifu Guide, and other things that I do translate, they also get absorbed in there. And these are two of the teachers that were my inspiration in that. The first one is Wang Wang, who I met in Germany actually, and I came to see him a few times to study with him before he died. In Beijing and in Wuhan, and in Wuhan also it was a very short time. And later on I was moved towards Shifu Yaoshan, who is, for some people, a little bit of a complicated element of the Wuhan Mountains, and he definitely got into some troubles with the local government. But he has a brother in the national government, so he feels very safe, fortunately. I want to go through a little bit of summation of the Sandongjing, so that you have a little bit of idea what it's about. I'm not going to cite anything, I'm not going to give any specific details, it's just to give you an introduction about what it is. And then I will tell you a little bit more about why I give all these summation. So first of all, Daoism, as you know, of course, is originated from a worldview, and that worldview for Daoist is divided into 3 caves. These 3 caves are translated as the 3 pure ones, as the 3 elements, or the 3 realms, and all the scriptures that are about that. And you have to understand to which level you belong to be able to know what scriptures you should study and what you should practice and what you need to go to the next part. That means that everybody starts with the 3rd cave, then the 2nd cave, and then the 3rd cave. So if you start in the 3rd cave and you miss the foundations, so you have to be able to be smart enough to go up on this level. It's a little bit like education in the West, right? You start at the primary school, then you go to high school, then you go to university, if you're lucky. As if you're not lucky, you stay after high school and you start working in the supermarket, the cash registers, right? Not to insult people who study on a lower level in Taoism, but because every level of Taoism is important for the persecution of Taoism. We see this also in Buddhism. I spoke once with Lama, he said like there's 4,000 people working in the Dala and Lhasa, but there's only 4 people who are relevant. And so these are the only ones that are very relevant. The 3 caves and the origins is based on the 3 origins as the beginning of the Hutu, the the chaos of the universe, and you see that the Tao and the Qi, they always come together within that worldview. And I will summarize a little bit what it says here to save time, because I don't know exactly how much time I have. Then these three origins, they changed into the Shu, the Yuan, and the Xuan Qi, and then the three Qi gave birth to all things. So it is a becoming process. It's different than, for instance, what is described in the Jing. It's also different what is described in popular Taoism nowadays. The process of creation is death before the chaos. It was the beginning of Yuan Qi. The Yuan Qi moved, and then the heaven and the earth were formed. And then the Shu Yuan and the Xuan Qi gave birth to all things. So the many transformations of heaven and earth are naturally not bred or created by the three primes, but guided by the nine Qi. So other people have talked about it. I'm not going to explain too much about that. And without it, nothing can be born. So it means there is a requirement of particular kind of elements before living things can exist. One thing, what is being made clear is if you talk about yin yang is only about the things in general. But if you talk about Wuxi, you only talk about the living things. Right? Wuxi does not matter for cars, but only for living beings. That's also the irony of modern feng shui, for instance. The Wuxi is about living things, but if you do feng shui with dead things, that is not about the Wuxi relationship that people talk about. There's 16 chapters, by the way, in the Sandongjing. It means 16 chapters. I will give a short, brief report on easygoing. First of all, there's the biographies of the mortals and masters, and morality, methods, and progress, which is important because they say you can't make progress if you're not a moral person, right? So we had some discussions with some speakers also about if morality was important or not. But within the Sandongjing, it's definitely a core issue. Then there is the law of the three yuan, or the three primes or colors. There is the 8 qi, or the 8 meetings. There's the 5 virtues, the 3 primes, the 6 guidance and cloud script. And these are the hidden transcriptions. That means that technically, because of the level of development, you will get spontaneous revelations of sacred text produced by divinities or by mortals or by gods or anything. This is also, of course, used by people who say that they have revelations, and as a result of that, there's also a lot of fake revelations. So Daoist, in general, pointed out the first time, they are basically testing the validity of the revelation. So if you have a revelation, you have to be tested. If you have a revelation, you just bring it out, and it actually not valid. And so it's a little bit similar like the scientific process. In the 4th chapter, they talk about the classical 39 chapters. And it basically gives the rules of thumb about what it means to be a Daoist. For instance, you should never take a break, you should always keep your breath calm, breath cheek calm, and you should understand the esoteric anatomy of the body. Right? So, who of you likes to avoid this? Who of you likes to have a break sometimes? Nobody likes to have a break? Okay, great. So, you're all suitable material for becoming a Daoist. So, in the 5th chapter, there's the interpretation of the Taiwan book written by Sun Wu. That's too much to talk about now. And they talk about Wu Wei as respect for the Tao. That means basically withholding acting, withholding things. Like, for instance, you are hungry, yes, because you want to eat. And actually, you wait. Yes, you wait until the hunger subsides and then you eat. Right? You don't go to the supermarket because when you're hungry, you always tend to buy too much. You recognize that? Yes? So, Daoist method to save on your money is withhold. Yes? Withhold. Then also what it says in that book is that you have to have shame. If you don't have shame, you cannot empower yourself. So part of your practice, part of your learning is to be shameful. So if you're not ashamed about yourself, about the things that you do, you cannot be self-critical. Right? So that's the point. You have to be self-critical. In the next 5 chapters, Lao Jing, Taijiquan, of the natural origin of nothingness. That's the the book that I've been describing at that moment. And it talks about the levels of the qi, the transformation of the tongue from qi coherence in the body to the red light of the qi, and then the relationship with the red ink in talismanic writing, and the lecture that you gave about checking, using blood for writing, originates also in that same place. So the tongue is in that sense the prime source of power in talismanic writing, and for blood writing it's the same, because the sincerity is the cause. So it's a lower level of talismanic writing. The yellow qi of flesh that is coming, so the body with flesh is yellow, and that is called also Zhonghe, and the core harmony, and the Zhonghe turns into Lao Zheng, so then gradually the yellow turns into white, which is the source of water. And Chinese medicine, where the Daoist classes here about Chinese medicine, we never talk about energy, they always talk about water in relation to qi. Then in the Shanxing Quanting, the inner and the outer chapters, they talk about the sincere learning of mortals. They talk about visualization methods, they talk about the Bravo sheet, the location of the movement, and there's several visions. You have to understand that in the Sandongjing, the different chapters, the different books that they describe, they do not agree with each other. It's the same as when you read Chinese medical texts from the past, and several chapters they seem to be contradictory to each other. So it depends very much on your own development, what you will pick out and what you can make work for yourself. They talk about the inner gods, they talk about Tai Chi, they talk about the power of recitation, they talk about Kung Po. Kung Po very often are being translated as souls. I make it a point always to make sure that you use the word Kung and Po in their original meaning as Kung and Po, because souls is a typical Christian and Islamic thing, and it's not related to the thing that is happening nowadays. People translate it as such, but the function of the soul and the function of the Kung Po is very different. You are the soul, there's always somebody just gets to help you with the different processes, and if you do not help yourself, they will not help you too. And they actually cause them to age and to die, so they become their enemies. So the Kung Po can also be the illicit demons of in some ways. They can become the demons. Then there is the shun, the awareness, separation with the form of your body, and at that moment is the source of death. So at the moment when you start slacking your body, you start hanging in your chair, you start moving and so on, and at that moment automatically you lose the form of your body, and as a result that your shun cannot develop, and as a result that the loss of your shun, you will eventually die. Then there's the Taijiquan and health, which is about Qi and about the action of Ling, and talking about focusing focus. And I understand I have a little time left. And then in chapter 9 is about the body of the action. There's everything, the scattering of the energy and the predictability of the body. That's the point. Because the body is unpredictable, you need to practice. Yesterday, Lydia talked also about the organization of your mind and your body in practice. The reason for that is because you take away the freedom to be unpredictable, right? So your training is there to take the unpredictability away. You become more like a living ritual. And then birth is seen as a transformation of Tao, and let's go skip a few chapters in that sense. So if I emphasize some of the highlights of ideas in the Sandongjing, then first thing is that the whole Sandongjing is about how to become immortal. You have to understand the order of earth, you have to understand the source of heaven, you have to understand Ling, the luminosity of inside your body or in existence, and to connect Shen awareness with the occult nature of reality, because predictability is the body and also of spirits, ghosts, and so on. The spirits of the body as an expression of that predictability, resulting in ignorance, karma, evil possession, finalizing death, and so on. And understanding how we come to the world and our conscious nature that frees us from evil. And of course, that we should never take a break, and as a result, we always remain active and vigilant in our spiritual development. Then the worldview itself, when we summarize that, we talk about Qi, we talk about seeing multiple realities, and Taiji is the big polarization, the bigger pole, the relationship between red ink, yellow flesh, and white qi, The three pure ones is heaven, water, and earth, the divine realm, and the realms of ghosts and spirits, and the esoteric realm is divided in the relationship and interdependency as the role of the Tao. Well, I think my time is finished. So yes. So
if you 1 minute.
Oh, 1 minute. Great. So the Sandongjing is as a book of healing from evil, and it says basically when you practice Tao, this is healing, right? So there is no other way of healing necessary, like distance healing and so on. These are typical developments that were introduced in China by Hong Kong from Western esoterics, and they are not necessarily part of Chinese culture. Massage, of course, is. So touch has a particular kind of understanding for that, for healing. But it says basically, if you do not practice Tao, then you open yourself up to evil. So as a result that you become also vulnerable. Then you have to, there are many definitions to not take a rest, and you have to continuously work on repairing of your form, so it means you have to exercise, and so on, to make sure that your awareness will grow. You have to develop unification of the luminosity and your Shen awareness. That means that you have to become more aware of the occult nature of reality. You have to recite to shape your mind and worldview, and the relationship with transmission of gods to create certainties. So it means that your relationship with gods has to be developed to create certainties, and identify gods through ritual. So ritual is an essential part of it. And meditation and life are seen as a ritual, so that's also why all this different kind of information is important for within the Sandongjing. And then the last one, and not the least one, you need knowledge to reduce your sensitivity to evil. Of course, the question then is, what is correct knowledge or is not correct knowledge? So you see there's many more parts of this. If you want, I'm going to make a video later on where the whole thing is going to be introduced. So you can always watch it later on my YouTube channel. So thank you very much for your attention.